Hello, everybody. Welcome to Thursday morning. This is the Podcast Daily. That's Bill Landis. I'm Jeremy Birmingham. We are finishing up, as promised, the rundown of the Ohio State recruiting class of 2023 as it stands as the Buckeyes get ready to march into the 2022 season. And when that happens, Bill, their focus turns away a little bit from the day-to-day recruiting, the how do you do type of stuff that you have to do all year round, how are you feeling type of stuff that you have to do, the emotional management that you have to do with recruits. Now it's about, hey, we're trying to win a national championship, and that matters more in a lot of cases. What you do on the field starting next Saturday matters more in a lot of cases than that sort of maintenance, right?
Yeah, I think especially with this team and this year with this defense and everybody wanting to see what it's about, the offense, I think, pretty much sells itself. But there's some holes left, I think, in this class on the defensive side that they're trying to fill, and I think some prospects out there that are eager to see what this looks like. So that starts next weekend.
Yeah, and that is going to start in earnest. We're going to deep dive into the recruiting list of visitors for next week sometime next week. But the three top targets at defensive end, Mateo Uiagalelei, Keon Keeley, and Damon Wilson will all be in town. They're going to be part of, and I said it on Wednesday's show, like maybe the most ridiculous recruiting list I've ever seen for a football game at Ohio State, and that's saying something. I'm kind of reminded right now of 2017 Ohio State, Michigan. That was a day when Jeff Okudah, Marvin Wilson, I mean, it was like Baron Browning, the who's who around the country of everyone was in town. And I think you're going to see a similar style of experience next weekend at Ohio State. But what we will see is every single defensive commitment that Ohio State has in their class of 2023 on campus. They're all coming back for this game. And we'll start with the guy who has to travel the shortest distance. That's Will Smith, interior lineman, defensive lineman, 3-tech type out of Dublin Coffin High School. Obviously, folks, if you're not familiar with recruiting, if you're not a day-to-day recruiting watcher, you still know who Will Smith is anyway, as far as Ohio State goes.
Players gotten a lot better, I think, over the last year, right? I remember seeing him last summer thinking to myself, like, I don't know. Seeing him this summer, I was like, okay, I get it. Like, he seems quicker, noticeably bigger. I think watching him work with Larry Johnson as often as he got to this summer, I think you could tell that Larry was pleased with the progress that Will has made. So lower-ranked guy, but I think a kid who's going to be a pretty quality player.
It's an underrated aspect of defensive line recruiting around here in the last few years that the local kids, the Jonathan Coopers, the Jack Sawyers, the advantage that those guys have to be able to, the Ty Hamiltons, being able to come here as much as they can in the summer and work with Larry Johnson is a huge, huge development advantage for someone like Will Smith. And obviously, you know, his father, an All-American at Ohio State, a former first-round pick of the New Orleans Saints, like this is a kid that comes from some pretty good stock. And you know that you have upside there with him. Also, on the defensive line at defensive tackle is Jason Moore from Baltimore. This is a kid that Ohio State had to pluck away from Notre Dame really in the recruiting process, and one of those guys that just fits Ohio State to a T from a personality standpoint, a work ethic standpoint. Not a big look at me guy, but he's the number one rated defensive tackle in the country according to Rivals.com. And again, we're talking about a defensive class that doesn't get a lot of hype.
Yeah.
But I wrote about this for OhioState.Rivals.com. In the last month, Ohio State had Jason Moore, Arvell Reese, Jaden Bonsu. That's a pretty good group of commitments to come in here in the last month. And then you had Kayan Lee and Kelvin Simpson-Hunt and Jermaine Matthews. And all of a sudden, that 6-week stretch, which a lot of folks were saying was pretty bad, looks pretty good to me. But it's highlighted, I think, by Jason Moore, the number one ranked defensive tackle in the country, 6'6", 270. This is a kid that I think people look at and say, defensive end, maybe a guy that can move inside or out, but it's sort of that new body style that Larry Johnson loves.
Probably their best win to date in the class. I mean, on either side of the ball, I would say. I actually forgot about him, which I think speaks to sort of just how understated he's been in his recruitment. I know you wrote the other day about don't worry about defensive tackle. And in my head, I was like, well, they only have one because I forgot that Jason Moore is probably going to be a defensive tackle. And this is a kid who's, a top 50-ish kind of player, just a really explosive talent, really good basketball player too. His brother is a really good player at Villanova, and I think Jason picked up some of that too. So I love those kind of players, the kind of like Draymond Jones type, where they're maybe a high school end, but you can tell they're going to be really good 3 technique in college.
Yeah, and as a Philadelphia guy, Bill knows all about Villanova, loves Villanova because Villanova is Philadelphia's college team. We can, at defensive tackle, at defensive line right now, if there's any flip concerns, I would say there aren't.
It doesn't seem like it.
Those two guys are pretty locked in. Obviously, Will Smith, the legacy here. Jason Moore, he chose Ohio State when he had options all over the country. And as Bill said, this is not a kid that's out there doing a lot of chirping, isn't really looking for, people to pay attention to him. And that generally bodes well in the recruiting trail for the team that they're committed to. Linebacker, there's one. And it's Arvell Reese from Cleveland Glenville High School, 6'4", 225 pounds, runs a 4.58. This is a kid that in any normal recruiting cycle, I think fans would be super excited about. Yeah. And and I don't know if this is one of those situations where a kid's from Ohio, and so people automatically dismiss them as not being important.
I think it is what it is, yeah.
Stop doing that, people.
It happens a lot.
It shouldn't happen. This is a super freaky athlete, a kid that is really going to have a lot of potential for Ohio State to play on the edge. If he puts on 15, 20 pounds, he could maybe be a defensive end in this class. If he sticks in that 225, 230 range, you have a big, menacing Mike linebacker, and that's what Ohio State's been recruiting him at. He committed to Ohio State last month when he did because the Buckeyes had a perceived need for a boost.
Yeah.
I think that they knew he was going to be in this class. Ted Ginn Sr., the legendary coach at Cleveland Glenville, prefers his guys to commit later in the cycle. But Ohio State said, hey, you know what, Arvell, we know you're coming. How about you just
go ahead and fire that tweet off.
Let's fire that off. You've had this graphic set up for a while. Let's get it knocked out. No concerns with him. This is a kid that Penn State, Michigan, Kentucky, we're all over. Alabama has offered. Other schools around the country have offered. But it's a young man who grew up in Ohio, dreaming of playing for Ohio State, wearing the Block O. He is the first Ohio State commitment from Cleveland Glenville High School since 2014, and what will likely be the beginning of a new run at Glenville as Ted Ginn's program reinvigorates itself.
Yeah, they have guys in 24 and 25, I think, that are Ohio State caliber, so I think there's going to be a few here the next couple of years. I love the player, Arvell Reese, because there's a little ambiguity on the position. I do wonder if they should be done at linebacker, but I'm also not in favor of just taking someone to take them because you feel that way. Yeah. I think you need to take somebody who you really believe in. So I don't know. Maybe you can tell me I'm wrong, but I'm a little curious to see what they do there, just because there's that possibility that Arvell could be a defensive lineman down the road. I'm
certainly not going to tell you you're wrong, but I think you're right on. You're not going to just take anyone.
Yeah.
Ohio State's in a position at that position. I love being extremely redundant. They're at a position at that position where you're going to go take a guy that you're only going to take him if he's a surefire, come in here and play type of guy. They really were huge fans of Tackett Curtis, who committed to USC. Sort of surprised people. If you're looking for a potential flip, I guess it's more of is there any possibility Ohio State can flip in someone like Tackett Curtis if USC's defense struggles, if he decides as he gets closer, as we talked about on the Wednesday show, as he gets closer to signing day, does he want to go all the way out to California? It's a kid from a very small town in Louisiana, not like a New Orleans kid. He's from Many, Louisiana, which a lot of people I've talked to have said it's like a Midwest town in Louisiana. It's not your traditional, Cajun highways. Yeah, exactly. But I think you're right at thinking that there is some ambiguity because you don't know with Arvell Reese if he's going to get bigger. And if you look at him, I'm telling you, if you see that kid in person, you can see where you could
I think he's going to get bigger.
Right. I mean, if he gets in that 245, 250 range, and it's not unheard of to have a 6'4", 250-pound middle linebacker. That was something that was maybe old school football.
Yeah.
We haven't had one of those around here in a while at Ohio State. I mean, we had Raekwon McMillan at 6'2", 240. But the body style of Arvell, if he's able to keep that speed, then all of a sudden you have an Andy Katzenmoyer-sized middle linebacker, which it's been a while.
Yeah, I mean, the size is not necessarily prohibitive as long as he can still move the way that he needs to move in this defense. And seeing his athletic profile when he was out here camping in June, he definitely has that, even if he does get a little bit bigger.
I like that word choice, prohibitive.
Thank you.
Thank you for using it. Let's move over to the secondary. It's sort of the position of the most intrigue for Ohio State most of this cycle because it's the spot where you had the Dijon Johnson decommitment, who was, by some accounts, a top 40 player in the country, by others, a kid that has just a lot of raw upside potential, but you weren't sure what you were going to get. What you have currently are three cornerbacks committed. You have Jermaine Matthews from Winton Woods High School in Cincinnati. Obviously not a concern as far as a flip goes like that.
Yeah.
If someone flips an Ohio kid from Ohio State, we could probably just expect the snow to start falling because the world is upside down at that point. Then you have Kayan Lee from Georgia, who is a former Georgia commitment who reopened his recruitment and ended up committing to Ohio State. That's an interesting one just because, he was committed to Georgia, and you do wonder if the Bulldogs made a push.
Yeah.
Do you have concerns? I don't have those concerns with Kay and Lee because of Miguel Patrick, one of the Ohio State staff members here, who is a former high school head coach of Kay and Lee's. And I think that relationship, as long as Miguel Patrick is here until signing day, which that is certainly the intention. But you never know. I mean, I guess we're in a weird world. I don't think there's any real concern with Kay and Lee. That is the type of corner, we're going to deep dive into what guys can do, what they bring into the class. That's one of those feisty little corners that you really kind of like to have on your team, just an aggressive little, I don't want to say like troll, but he's out there like to cause trouble for people.
If he's a troll, we don't mean that pejoratively.
Yeah, he's out there to cause trouble for people.
Yeah, I actually get kind of similar vibes from Jermaine Matthews too. I think we've talked a lot about guys with that mentality in various shows on the podcast, and I think they got two in this corner group who bring that. Calvin Simpson-Hunt, maybe not, but if he doesn't have that kind of personality trait, he makes up for it with being able to fly up and down the field.
Yeah,
that serious
Calvin Simpson-Hunt, the third corner in this class from Waxahachie, I think it's how it's pronounced. Waxahachie in Texas, former Texas Tech commit. So again, when you're talking about flip concerns, it's always more concerning when a guy has already flipped from somewhere else, because you know that there's at least the thought. I don't think there's a major concern right now, but I think it's hard for Ohio State fans to not be like scarred by Terrence Brooks and Jordan Battle and all these. The last couple of years, there's been a handful of defensive backs that have flipped things up on Ohio State at the last minute. You're like, are you kidding me? And the Buckeyes are counting pretty heavily on Calvin Simpson-Hunt, who I think has the highest upside of this cornerback group. 6'1", 200 pounds, just an absolute blazing fast sprinter. Real long. It's everything you want in a corner, and I think he's got NFL first-round pick potential at corner. But it is a concern just because he's in Texas, and you don't know what A&M and Texas and these schools are going to do come December.
Yeah, those schools would scare me until the end. I mean, honestly, maybe even Texas Tech too.
Yeah,
that's an interesting program at the moment, and clearly he liked them enough at one point to be committed to them. I think Joey McGuire's got a lot of people believing in what he's building down there, so I'm sure they're going to stay in it, try to stay in it till the end as well. So I wouldn't be super alarmed, but I think you have to have your antennas up a little bit when A&M and Texas are so close by for him.
Yeah, when we're talking flip watch concerns, as we did on Wednesday, we put a number on it. I would put like a 2 on Calvin Simpson-Hunt right now. I just don't think so. I put like Kay and Lee at a none or a 1. I mean, I guess if we're doing 1 to 10, 1's the lowest, right?
You can call it a 0.
I will call it a 0. Right now, there's no concerns there. As we move to safety, that is the spot where I think the most intrigue has been, because people all cycle have been like, why on earth would Ohio State want 4 safeties in this class? When you look at the roster,
I know why.
What's the reason why?
It's a safety-driven defense.
Safety-driven defense at Ohio State. And, they're going to lose 3 after this year in Ronnie Hickman and Josh Proctor and Tanner McAllister. Mm-hmm. But you already have the next wave of starters ready. And then you have guys like Jansen Dunn and Sonny Styles and Kai Stokes and whatever they do with guys like Cam Martinez. But they still wanted 4 in this class, and right now they've got 3. One of them is Cedric Hawkins, whose commitment was one of the more bizarre commitments in this cycle. It's not a knock on Cedric. He had an Ohio State offer. He wanted to accept it. He did. He just did it at the end of the first quarter of the Rose Bowl when the Ohio State coaching staff was in California, had no idea it was coming. Those sort of things happen sometimes, and maybe it's just a player taking advantage of the moment.
Yeah.
And that's not the biggest concern with Cedric Hawkins. The biggest concern is that the entire defensive staff he committed to is no longer working here. Right. And that is at least a door opener for other schools around the country to say, hey, number one, you're the third safety in a class. Number 2, you don't know these coaches. So Perry Eliano, these guys have been working from a little bit of a disadvantage to keep that going. But Cedric has not publicly done anything crazy. He's not said anything. He has made a visit to Auburn over the summer that's kind of had some alarm bells going off for people. But if I had to pick one guy, I'd say he's like a 4 on the flip watch, just because he did take that visit to Auburn and because of what I just said.
And also he's in Florida. Can never dismiss the Florida factor. Really, bizarre, I think, is a good way to put it. Like, he committed. I was like, who? Like, it wasn't, especially at that time, because like you knew, or I guess we didn't know officially, but we knew officially that staff was going to be out the door, and he's still committed. So.
Well, Matt Barnes had been talking about taking the job at Memphis with people in California just a few days earlier.
Yeah.
It was not a surprise that staff was disassembled. what was a surprise is that Cedric Hawkins said, you know what, I'm taking my spot and you can't stop me.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess I'll give the new staff credit for kind of just picking up that relationship and seemingly putting it in a good spot. But you're right, it's a new relationship kind of across the board for him and everybody in the building. And I don't know. I don't know what Miami and Florida think of Cedric Hawkins, but I'm just going to assume that they're going to try to aggressively pursue him.
And I want to couple that. I think there's this credit due to the new coaching staff for continuing to allow him to be a commitment.
Yeah,
because there is a heavy percentage of college staffs around the country that would have walked in and said, you know what, that's not our guy. No thanks. We're gonna start over. And that's not what happened. Instead, Perry Eliano, Jim Knowles, Ryan Day, led that effort. But they made it a point to make sure that Cedric Hawkins stays involved. He has been very involved in helping recruit Florida and done a great job with Brandon Ennis and Carnell Tate and all the other guys down there. But he's safety one in the class as far as when he committed. And the second one was Malik Hartford, who Ohio State offered pretty much the day after Perry Eliano got the job here, because he was recruiting him extremely hard for Cincinnati. To me, Malik Hartford is a future captain type of all Big Ten type player. I think he's a stud. I think he's one of the guys that nationally is not getting near enough attention. 6'2", 200 pounds, an absolute heat-seeking missile type of safety. I worry about him hurting himself more than I worry about him flipping to another school. That's watching the way he plays. He plays with what we would call reckless abandon.
That hit, I don't know who they played.
Cincinnati Xavier.
Yeah, I mean, just annihilated the poor kid. And it was a clean hit. There was nothing dirty about it. But I thought to myself, man, and I thought more about Malik. I was like, be careful, dude. Because those are the kind of hits where you can knock yourself out.
It drew a flag, but only because it's high school football and they can't review it. It would draw a flag in college, and then it would have been overturned.
Yeah.
They probably still would have said unnecessary roughness, maybe. Yeah. But, football has a lot of necessary roughness.
In football, you can't hit too hard anymore.
Speaking of guys who hit hard, Jaden Bonsu, that's the other safety in the class, the most recent commitment for the Buckeyes. New Jersey, 6'2", 190 pounds, a guy that a lot of folks think is another candidate to move position. So when we're talking about Arvell Reese and maybe he moves down to the defensive end, I guess there are people who believe out there that Jaden Bonsu could maybe slide down and be that linebacker.
Yeah, I see it.
And that's what happens when you have flexibility with athletes, I guess. But that's not the plan. Ohio State's plan has been reiterated to me clearly. They think he's a safety. But they also have Court Williams playing a lot of what we would call the bullet position here, and that is a hybrid linebacker safety spot, and I think that's where you would see Jaden Bonsu in the future. I have him on my list of potential flip watch candidates, but maybe a 1 right now, but only because he was clearly so back and forth in his recruitment. Multiple times he set up commitment dates. He had told Miami he was going there. He had told Ohio State he was coming here. Then flipped back, went to Miami, then came back to Ohio State. So I guess there's at least some opportunity for Mario Cristobal, Mel Tucker, and others to kind of, drive a wedge between him and the Buckeyes. But right now he's been pretty active as far as a recruiting for Ohio State, and I don't see any concerns.
Yeah, I wouldn't be super concerned about him either. It's just when you decide, I guess, whether or not you want to be concerned, you have to look at who else could potentially be involved. And when it's Miami and even Michigan State, I think is trying to play a similar to Miami game a little bit, maybe not quite as successful.
Not quite as aggressive.
The
landscape is different, literally, and I think that makes it harder to sell.
It is very different. But I keep an eye on them, I guess, is how I would view it, but I don't think it's an exceedingly high rate of alarm.
Yeah, I mean, that's the entirety of the Ohio State defensive recruiting class right now, and if there's a spot where the Buckeyes are going to turn their focus as we head into the season, it really is on the defensive side of the ball, shoring that up on the defensive line. And maybe, just maybe, keeping a slight window open if Caleb Downs likes what he sees out of this safety-driven defense and decides, hey, I'd like to take a second look at Ohio State. That's one guy they would certainly welcome back into the mix with open arms. Other than that, I think, as we talked about, after Jaden Bonsu committed, I think you could almost be done with the defensive recruiting class other than 2 defensive ends and another safety, which is kind of crazy. But who knows?
It's a crazy world we're living in.
We are living in a crazy, crazy world. And we're done talking about this right now. We'll catch back up on the Ohio State recruiting class with myself, Jeremy Birmingham, and Bill Landis in the next couple of weeks. So we'll try to do this on Wednesdays every week, but this week it's a twofer. So thanks for watching the podcast daily. Thanks for listening. Please rate, review, subscribe, like us on all of your social media platforms. And thanks for watching. See you next time.